There is a rule in the Galactic Conclave that no one wrote down and no one enforces. It exists the way gravity exists, quietly, absolutely, without needing to be argued. It appears on star charts as a faint amber ring around a modest yellow sun at the edge of the Orion Arm, and beneath the ring in every known language are 4 words: do not approach. Reason: unknown. Ambassador Velsarith of the Conclave Diplomatic Corps had been staring at that annotation for 11 years. She was Thalari, a species whose memory stretched back 60,000 years, whose elders had personally witnessed the birth and death of empires, and she had never, in all the archives she had access to, found a record of who placed those words there first. No vote, no decree, no incident report. One cycle it wasn't there. The next cycle it was. And every civilization that noticed it simply left it alone. She was in the observation lounge of the diplomatic cruiser Measured Patience when her attaché, a young Corvani named Sane, asked the question every junior diplomat eventually asked. Has anyone ever gone in? Velsarith didn't look away from the viewport. 17 recorded attempts, she said. The Vreth Dominion sent a survey fleet 3 centuries ago. 42 vessels, good sensors, experienced crew. She paused. They crossed the boundary at 600 Vreth standard. At 617, their signal stopped. Not jammed, not static, just stopped. As if the universe had quietly closed a door. And the fleet? Gone, no debris, no energy readings, no emergency transponders. The Vreth sent 3 more fleets over the following decade to look for the first one. She turned to look at him. Those disappeared too. Sane processed this for a moment. So humanity destroyed them. We don't know that, Velsarith said carefully. We've never seen humanity do anything. That's the point. The humans have never fired on a conclave vessel, never issued a formal warning, never made diplomatic contact, never claimed territory beyond their own system. They simply exist quietly behind that ring, and things that go in don't come out. She pulled up the long-range feed on the wall display, a real-time composite of the Sol boundary zone, updated every 3 standard minutes. The ring was there. The yellow sun burned behind it, ordinary and ancient and patient. There are currently 4 human-built structures visible from outside the boundary, she continued, pointing at faint geometric shapes at the system's edge. We have had 40 years of high-resolution imaging. The structures haven't changed. No expansions. No weapons emplacements we can identify. No traffic. Just 4 structures sitting at the edge of their system like fence posts. She lowered her hand. What does that suggest to you? Sane thought carefully, that they're not worried about us. Correct, she said. Now ask yourself why a species capable of making 11 Vreth survey fleets disappear without a trace would choose not to be worried about anyone. She switched off the display. That is the question that keeps me awake at night. Neither of them spoke for a while. The ship moved on through the dark, and the amber ring shrank behind them, and Velsarith thought not for the first time that the silence around Sol wasn't the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of a house whose occupant was watching through the window, perfectly still, waiting to see what you would do next. 3 days later, the Kareth hegemony announced that Warfleet Sigma 9 had been authorized to cross the boundary and assess the Sol system for strategic resource acquisition. Velsarith read the report at her desk and did not move for a long time. Then she quietly asked her navigation officer to plot the Measured Patience into a wide holding orbit at the boundaries, edge close enough to observe, far enough to not be mistaken for part of the invasion fleet. Around her, the oldest members of her crew went very, very quiet. The ones who had been alive long enough to hear stories. The ones whose grandparents had whispered about what happened to the Vreth. No one on that ship slept well that night. Grand Admiral Threx of the Kareth hegemony had never lost a battle. This was not modesty or reputation management. It was statistical fact, verified by hegemony war records stretching back 40 years of active command. 41 engagements, 41 victories. In 11 of those engagements, his fleet had been outnumbered. He had won those too. He stood at the command bridge of the dreadnought Absolute Dominion and watched Warfleet Sigma 9 take formation in the void. 11,217 vessels. Dreadnoughts, carrier platforms, siege engines, scout wings, supply chains long enough to sustain an occupation. The formation stretched across 600 kilometers of space, and from a distance must have looked like a second galaxy, a cold, angular one built from metal and intent. His intelligence briefing had been thorough. The Sol system star was entering a late phase of hydrogen burning, not dying but aging. The human population, according to best estimates from the half-dozen conclave probes that had managed to get sensor readings before losing signal, was somewhere between 10 and 12 billion. Ground-based civilization, significant industrial capacity, some orbital presence, nothing that justified the legend. The mythology around Sol is a product of absence, not evidence, his chief strategist, Commander Velran, had said during the final briefing. We have no confirmed record of human weapons, no documented engagement. Every fleet that disappeared into that system could have been destroyed by navigational anomalies, rogue singularities, equipment failure. We are pattern matching onto nothing and calling it a threat. Threx had found this argument compelling. It still was compelling, but he was a careful man, and careful men prepared for things they didn't believe in. He ordered the fleet into a spearhead formation, 11,000 ships pointing at the amber ring like a needle aimed at a nerve. He ordered full sensor arrays active. He ordered every communications officer to run continuous recording. Whatever happened in the Sol system, he wanted it documented in real time, on redundant systems, with no gaps. If there's nothing in there, he told Velran, we document that and come back with a colonization charter. If there's something in there, he shrugged. One of the small, contained gestures that his crew had learned meant certainty rather than uncertainty. 11,000 ships should be enough. The fleet moved. It moved with the mechanical patience of an industrial process, vast, unstoppable, indifferent to the scale of what it was doing. Stars drifted past in the viewport. The yellow sun ahead grew from a point to a disk. The amber ring on the charts grew from a line to a visible boundary, marked by those 4 peculiar human structures sitting at the system's edge like sentinels. Threx studied them as the fleet closed the distance. They were enormous, each one perhaps 40 kilometers across, shaped like flattened spheres, with no visible propulsion, no weapon ports, no external communications arrays. They looked, he thought, like sleeping things. He had the uncomfortable sensation that the word sleeping was doing a lot of work in that assessment. Any transmissions from the structures? He asked. None, Admiral. They've been silent since our sensors picked them up. No response to our approach signals. We've sent standard conclave contact protocols on 47 frequencies. No response. He nodded slowly. That fit the pattern. The humans didn't talk, they just watched. At 247 hegemony standard, the lead elements of Sigma 9 crossed the amber ring. The fleet followed in disciplined sequence, carrier groups, then dreadnoughts, then the siege platforms, then the long supply chains, all of it flowing through the boundary like water through a gate. It took 49 minutes for the full fleet to cross. For 17 minutes after the last ship crossed, nothing happened. The sensors read a normal solar system. The sun burned. The planets orbited. The 4 human structures sat silent at the system's edge. And then, at 4:03, every sensor on every ship in Warfleet Sigma 9 registered the exact same reading at the exact same moment. The stars behind them were gone. For 4 seconds, the bridge of the absolute dominion was completely silent. Not the silence of discipline or professional calm. The silence of 11 trained officers simultaneously encountering something their instruments were telling them was impossible, and their minds were refusing to process. Threx had been in combat situations where junior officers froze. He had never seen it happen to veterans. He was seeing it now. Report, he said. His voice came out level. He was quietly grateful for 40 years of practice. His sensor chief, a pale-scaled Kareth named Orvex, was staring at her console with the expression of someone who had just discovered that mathematics was wrong. Admiral, she said carefully, the aft sensor array is showing nothing. Not signal loss, not interference. The stars are absent. Define absent. The background radiation is present. The void is present. The stars are not. She looked up. It's as if the light is simply not arriving. Fleet-wide communications erupted. 11,000 ships, all registering the same thing, all asking the same questions at once. The signal traffic was so dense it collapsed 3 of the Absolute Dominion's communication arrays simultaneously. Threx killed the fleet-wide channel before the noise could escalate into panic. "Navigation," he said, "our position." "We are." The navigator stopped, ran the calculation again, stopped again. "Admiral, we are at the same coordinates we were 4 minutes ago." "We've been stationary." "No, sir, we've been moving. Engines are nominal, speed is nominal. We are moving at standard cruise velocity." A long pause. "But our position is not changing." Threx sat with this information for a moment. His fleet was moving at full cruise speed through empty space and going nowhere. Behind them, the stars had stopped existing. Ahead of them, the Sol system still glowed on forward sensors, normal, unchanged, the yellow sun burning at its steady rate as if none of this were its concern. He did not reach for any of the 11,000 weapons at his disposal. This was, he would later think, the only genuinely intelligent decision he made in the next 6 hours. "All stop," he said quietly. "Weapons to stand by, all stop fleet-wide." There was a moment of resistance in the comms. Some of the carrier group commanders wanted to push forward, wanted to fight something, wanted to do anything other than float in a box made of missing stars. Threx cut them off one by one with 3-word commands that left no room for discussion. He had a feeling, not a sensor reading, not a tactical assessment, just a deep mammalian certainty in the part of his brain that had evolved to recognize when something much larger than him was paying attention, that the very worst thing Sigma-9 could do right now was make a loud noise. They floated in the impossible dark for 6 hours and 43 minutes. No attacks came. No transmissions arrived. Nothing changed except the slow, growing awareness among 11,000 crews that they were not alone in the dark, and that whatever was with them had chosen, very deliberately, to let them think about that for a while. Threx used the time. He reviewed every scrap of intelligence on the Sol system. He read the archived reports on the Vreth Dominion's disappearances. He found, buried in the oldest Conclave records he could access through the ship's database, a single line from a Thalari observer who had watched the 3rd Vreth fleet cross the boundary. "They do not strike. They simply make you understand that striking you is a choice they are making every moment they refrain from it." He read that line 4 times. Then the darkness peeled back. Not suddenly, slowly, deliberately, like a curtain being drawn aside by someone who wanted you to have time to compose yourself before seeing what was on the other side. Stars reappeared at the edges first, then more, until the full sky was restored. But the space between his fleet and the Sol system was no longer empty. What filled it was so large that his tactical display refused to render it to scale. His navigation AI quietly crashed and rebooted. Velran appeared at his shoulder, looked at the display, and said nothing for a long time. Then, "Admiral, I think I owe you an apology." "Later," said Threx. He was trying to understand what he was looking at. It was not a weapon. Threx had been a military commander for 40 years, and he knew what weapons looked like, even alien ones, even theoretical ones he had only read about in classified hegemony threat assessments. Weapons had geometry designed around the act of destroying. They had angles built for penetration, emplacements positioned for coverage, structural asymmetries that spoke of purpose. What surrounded Warfleet Sigma-9 on all sides was a sphere, not aggressive, not pointed. A sphere, the most neutral shape in the universe, the shape of planets and suns, of things that simply are rather than things that do. It was approximately 600 kilometers in diameter. Its interior surface curved gently away in all directions, featureless and smooth at first glance. But at this distance, close enough that the Absolute Dominion's optical sensors could resolve fine detail, the interior surface was not featureless at all. It was full of ships. They were docked in recessed berths along the entire inner surface, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arrayed in neat rows that curved away into the distance on all sides. Different shapes, different sizes, different design philosophies. Threx's database identified a Vreth Dominion survey vessel in one of the nearest berths, the hull markings still sharp, the running lights dark but intact, the vessel itself in what appeared to be perfect condition. In the berth beside it, a class of ship he didn't recognize at all. In the berth beside that, something that looked old enough to have been built before his species had discovered metallurgy. 300 years of missing fleets, not destroyed, collected. His communications officer made a sound that was not quite a word, a small, involuntary noise of pure disbelief. Threx didn't blame her. He was making similar sounds internally. Human figures moved along the inner surface. Dozens of them in simple gray suits moving between the docked ships with the unhurried efficiency of maintenance workers who had been doing this job for a very long time. They ran diagnostics. They replaced components. They moved between vessels pushing supply trolleys with the calm of workers on a routine shift. Not soldiers, not guards, workers. People who showed up, did the job, went home. One of them detached from the surface and moved towards Sigma 9's formation. Alone. A single human in a gray suit, crossing 600 meters of open interior space with nothing but a maneuvering pack. The figure reached the hull of the Absolute Dominion, attached magnetically to the forward section, and paused. Then it knocked, 3 times, against the hull of an 11-kilometer dreadnought with a gloved fist, politely. Threx stared at the hull camera feed for 10 full seconds. The knocking there was no tactical framework for this. There was no section of the hegemony military doctrine that covered being knocked on by a single maintenance worker after your 11,000-ship fleet had been enclosed in a sphere without firing a shot. He turned to Velran. Velran spread his hands in a gesture that meant clearly, "I have no more advice to offer you tonight." Every captain in the fleet was watching the same camera feed. 11,000 ships, utterly silent, watching one human knock on a door. Threx stood up. "Tell the deck crew to cycle the forward starboard airlock," he said. "Standard Atmo, no weapons visible, no armor." He straightened his uniform. "I'll go down personally." Velran grabbed his arm. "Admiral." "If they wanted us dead, Velran," Threx said with perfect calm, "we would already be dead. We have been dead at their discretion for the last 6 hours and 43 minutes. He removed his aide's hand gently. "This person knocked. I'm going to answer the door." The walk down to the airlock was the longest walk of his life. Not because he was afraid he was, but that wasn't the thing that made it long. It was long because with every step he was revising, at a deep and fundamental level, everything he thought he understood about the shape of power in the galaxy. The airlock cycled. The outer door opened. The human stepped in, removed her helmet, and looked at him with calm brown eyes. She was carrying a thermos. Her name was Commander Ida Vasquez, Station Warden, 3rd Watch, Sol Frontier Archive. She had been doing this job for 19 years. Before her, her predecessor had done it for 22. Before that, another warden and another, stretching back in an unbroken line to the first person who had stepped into this role 3 centuries ago and quietly begun the longest diplomatic project in human history. She sat across from Threx in the Absolute Dominion's briefing room, poured 2 cups of something dark and hot from her thermos. He accepted his without knowing why, and looked at him with the relaxed attention of someone who had had this conversation before and knew exactly how it went. "I'm going to tell you the truth," she said, through the translation chip clipped to her collar. "All of it. You can verify everything I say against your own sensor records. I'm not going to threaten you and I'm not going to negotiate. I'm just going to explain and then I'm going to give you a choice." Threx, who had entered 900 treaty negotiations in his career, recognized immediately that this was none of those things. He said nothing and listened. "Humanity developed faster than light travel approximately 430 years ago," she said. "We celebrated for about 3 weeks. Then we made first contact with 2 other species within the same year, the Veth Collective and the Kale Confederation. We were thrilled." She paused, turning her cup in her hands. "Within 8 years, the Veth and the Kale were at war. Within 12 years, humanity was involved. Within 20 years, 2 more species had been drawn in. Total casualties across the conflict, 4.3 billion people. Threx said nothing. These were not numbers that required a response. Or ended, Vasquez continued. Wars usually do, but what we noticed sitting in the aftermath was a pattern. Every new contact introduced into the galactic community produced the same arc: curiosity, then competition, then conflict. Not because anyone was evil, because the conditions, scarcity assumptions, territorial instincts, the simple arithmetic of 2 expanding civilizations in the same space, made conflict nearly inevitable without infrastructure to prevent it. She took a sip of her drink. We decided to build the infrastructure. The frontier, Threx said. The frontier, she confirmed. We closed our system, built the archive, established the boundary, and spent the next 3 centuries appearing small, appearing ordinary. A single inhabited system with a modest population and no apparent interest in expansion. She smiled, and it was a quiet, unhurried smile. We needed to look like prey, because only civilizations that thought we were prey would test the boundary. And civilizations that test boundaries are precisely the ones that need to understand what they're dealing with before they start making decisions that affect everyone else. Threx set down his cup. You've been filtering, he said slowly. The boundary isn't a defense, it's a test. It's an invitation to reconsider, she said. The silence was never a warning, it was a pause. A space we built for exactly the moment you're sitting in right now, the moment after you've understood that you couldn't win before you've decided what that means. She met his eyes steadily. Most species, when they reach this room, have a great deal to reconsider. The fleet's in your archive, he said, every crew. Alive, healthy, in stasis, maintained at our expense for the duration. The moment a diplomatic resolution is reached, they go home, every one of them. She said this the way a person states a fact they have already decided and do not need to be talked into. We are not a punitive species, Admiral. We are a tired one, tired of watching civilizations tear each other apart because no one built the room for the conversation before the shooting started. Outside the viewport, the archive curved away in all directions, vast and patient and full of sleeping ships. Threx looked at it for a long time. He thought about 41 battles. He thought about 41 victories. He thought about what it meant to win when the other side had never really tried. You said you'd give me a choice, he said. I did, said Vasquez. She refilled his cup. Finish your coffee first. She walked him through the archive herself. They moved along the inner surface in magnetic boots, Vasquez pointing out berths the way a librarian points out shelves, with the easy familiarity of someone who knows every item by name. The scale of it was something Threx's brain kept rejecting, and then reluctantly accepting again. The curve of the inner surface was gradual enough that he could see hundreds of docked ships in every direction, their running lights dark, their hulls maintained to a standard that would have satisfied any hegemony inspection officer. The Vreth Dominion, she said, pausing at a row of 42 vessels, sleeker than modern designs, their hull markings faded but legible. First residents. Been here the longest. We've replaced 3 generations of stasis equipment since they arrived. She ran a gloved hand along the nearest hull with something that looked almost like affection. Their stasis logs are fascinating, actually. Dreams, mostly. The equipment wasn't designed for long-term use when they crossed, so we upgraded it. They dream now, gently. Threx looked at the ships. 300 years. The Vreth Dominion, the civilization that had sent these vessels, had gone through 6 governments and 2 civil conflicts in that time. The crew of these ships had slept through all of it. Do they know how long it's been? He asked. Not yet. We'll tell them when they wake up, she said it matter-of-factly. It's going to be a difficult conversation. We've been preparing materials, historical summaries, counseling protocols. We've had 300 years to think about how to have it gently. She turned to him. We take the obligation seriously. They walked on. She showed him the logs, the archive's records of every fleet that had crossed the boundary, displayed on wall panels that stretched around the curve of the inner surface. Each entry was meticulous. Date of crossing, fleet composition, condition on arrival, stasis status, maintenance history. Every entry was clinical and precise, and in every entry there was the same detail in the first line. Fleet arrived with weapons active. No hostile action taken by archive. Every single one. 400 years of provocation. 400 years of restraint. "You've never once retaliated," he said. "Retaliation was never the point," she said. "The point was the conversation afterward. We needed them here, Admiral, not dead. Dead admirals don't go home and tell their governments anything useful." They stopped at the far end of the archive, where the inner surface of the sphere was interrupted by a single door. It was not large, perhaps 3 meters high, 2 meters wide, sealed with a series of locks that did not look mechanical or electronic but something else, something that Threx's engineering instincts recognized as fundamentally serious. The door had no markings, no warnings, no labels of any kind. "What's behind it?" he asked, because it was the only question available. Vasquez looked at the door for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was the same, calm, level, unhurried, but something had shifted underneath it. Something that was not quite sadness and not quite pride, but occupied the space where both of those things would be if they were the same feeling. "Something we built after the Vreth arrived," she said. "After we understood what the archive was for. After we decided that there needed to be a last resort for a scenario we hoped would never come. A civilization that came through the boundary and couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be preserved, couldn't be redirected. A civilization that would, if released, destroy everything." She paused. "We have never opened it. In 400 years, we have never had to." She looked at him directly. "I don't intend to open it today." Threx stood in front of the door and felt the weight of what was behind it without needing to know what it was. He was a man who had spent 40 years calculating force and counterforce, threat and response, advantage and vulnerability. He could feel the arithmetic of the thing behind the door from the outside, the way you can feel a star's gravity without touching it. He had come here with 11,000 ships. In this moment, standing in front of a closed door, he felt exactly as powerful as a man with 11,000 ships deserved to feel when confronted with 400 years of patience, backed by something that had never needed to be used. He turned away from the door. "Tell me about the choice," he said. The choice was simple. It was the simplest thing Vasquez had said in their entire conversation, which was perhaps why it hit Threx the hardest. "Leave as you came," she said. "Every ship, every crew. No damage, no casualties, no record of this event transmitted to any conclave authority without your consent. You go home with everything you arrived with." She paused. "Except the assumption that this space is empty." They were back in the briefing room. The thermos was on the table. Outside, the archive curved in all directions, and through the viewport Threx could see his fleet. 11,000 ships hanging in the interior space like a model of something, patient and still, waiting for orders that he had not yet decided how to give. "The condition," he said. "It wasn't a question. There was always a condition." "One condition," Vasquez confirmed. "When you return to the conclave, you deliver a message, personally, in whatever format carries the most weight in your political structure to every member species. Not a threat, not an ultimatum, a standing offer." She slid a data chip across the table. "The full text is there. The short version is this. Humanity will release every archived fleet, every preserved crew, every ship in the archive, on the day the conclave establishes a unified first contact protocol. A set of shared rules, agreed by all member species, for how contact with new civilizations is handled, so that the next species to discover faster-than-light travel doesn't walk into a galaxy that immediately tries to conquer or convert or absorb them." Threx looked at the data chip. "You've been waiting for someone to carry this message." "We've been waiting for someone to arrive who could carry it credibly," she said. "A scout ship tells the conclave a story. A diplomatic courier tells them an interesting rumor. But the Grand Admiral of Warfleet Sigma 9, she gestured at him with a small, precise nod, who crossed the boundary with 11,000 vessels and came back with 11,000 vessels and a first-hand account of what's inside. That person gets listened to." He turned the chip over in his hands. It was a standard conclave format data chip, the kind used for official diplomatic correspondence. Whatever was on it, it had been prepared well in advance. They had been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time. "How many fleets are in there?" he asked quietly. "Currently, 23, from 14 different species." She folded her hands on the table. "The oldest crews have been in stasis for 312 years. They have families or had families before time made that complicated. They have lives interrupted. We maintain them because it's the right thing to do, and we will maintain them for as long as it takes. But," and here, for the first time in their conversation, something in her voice shifted into something tired and very human, "we would like to stop. We would like to open the archive and send everyone home and be done with this particular chapter." Threx held the chip. Outside, his fleet waited. In the archive around him, 23 fleets slept. The door at the far end of the sphere remained closed, as it had always remained closed, as humanity had made sure it remained closed for 400 years through patience and architecture, and a very specific kind of hope. "I have one question," he said. "Ask." "You could have sent this message yourself, 400 years ago. You could have opened communications with the Conclave at any time." He met her eyes. "Why didn't you?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "Because a message sent from strength is a demand," she said. "We needed it to be a request. We needed someone to come here, understand what we've built, and choose to carry it. Not because we made them, because they decided to." She picked up her thermos. "You decided to come here looking for something to conquer, Admiral. You're leaving carrying something worth more than a system." She almost smiled. "That's the whole point." Threx pocketed the chip. He stood, straightened his uniform, and looked at her for a long moment. "Your people are strange," he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said all day. "We've been told," she said. Warfleet Sigma 9 emerged from the Sol boundary at 1140 hegemony standard, in perfect formation, at cruise speed, engines nominal. All 11,217 vessels accounted for. Aboard the measured patients, Velsarith watched them come out on long-range sensors and felt something happen in her chest that she did not have a clean word for. She had watched them go in with weapons hot, and the casual certainty of a civilization that had never been surprised. She watched them come out with their formation intact, but something else, some quality of motion, some arrangement of ships that she had no sense or name for, fundamentally different. They moved like people who had been told a secret they were still processing. The first transmission came 11 minutes after Sigma 9's emergence. It was unencrypted, broadcast on all Conclave standard frequencies, formatted as an official hegemony diplomatic communique, the highest classification of formal communication the Karath possessed, reserved for declarations of war and treaties of total surrender. The signature at the bottom was Threx's personal command seal. Velsarith read it 4 times. Then she went to her private cabin, sat on the edge of her bunk, and read it twice more. It was not what she had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected: a threat assessment, a military report, a classified account of whatever had happened inside the boundary, but it was not this. It was a personal account, written in the direct, unadorned style of Karath military dispatch, without embellishment or qualification, of everything Threx had seen and heard and been shown inside the Sol Frontier Archive. The preserved fleets, the maintenance workers in gray suits, Commander Ida Vasquez and her thermos, the door that had not been opened, the standing offer, all of it laid out with the flat clarity of a man who had decided that the most useful thing he could do was tell the exact truth and let other people decide what to do with it. At the end of the communique, Threx had added a single personal note, outside the formal structure of the report. "I have reviewed my tactical assessment of the Sol engagement. I am revising my estimate of human military capability from negligible to unknown, and therefore to be treated as absolute. I am also revising my understanding of what military capability is for. Recommend all Conclave members read the attached offer in full. Recommend this recommendation be treated seriously." Within 6 hours, the communique had been received by every Conclave member species. Within 18 hours, the Conclave's emergency convening protocol had been triggered for the first time in 90 years, a protocol that required all member ambassadors to assemble within 72 hours for a session of maximum priority. Within 36 hours, Velsarith had received personal communication from 11 different member species requesting her assessment as a diplomatic observer. She gave each of them the same answer: read the offer. Read all of it. Then consider what it means that they have been waiting patiently for 400 years, maintaining their end of an arrangement no one agreed to, for a civilization that hasn't yet had the conversation they're trying to start. The conclave convened. It was not a short session. In the Sol Frontier Archive, Commander Ida Vasquez was on her third watch shift when the preliminary agreement came through, not the final protocol, not the full treaty, but the letter of intent, signed by 31 member species, committing to good faith negotiation of a unified first contact framework. She read it at her console, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the ceiling for a while. Then she walked to the main status board and updated the archive's operational log. The entry was brief: Day 146,003. Letter of intent received from Conclave. Stasis maintenance continues. Estimated time to full protocol agreement, unclear, standing by. Above the console, scratched into the metal by the first warden 4 centuries ago in handwriting that had faded but never been repainted, were words that every warden since had read at the start of every shift. Let them come, greet them kindly, give them the choice we never got. Vasquez read them as she always did. Then she poured the last of her coffee, sat down, and went back to work. Outside, in the dark between the stars, the amber ring around Sol burned its quiet warning. And somewhere on the other side of it, 23 fleets dreamed in their berths, and the door at the end of the archive stayed closed, and humanity waited, as it had always waited, with the particular patience of a species that had learned, at great cost and long ago, that the most powerful thing in the universe was not a weapon pointed outward. It was a door left open.